Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I am here to talk about my Lorwyn Eclipsed pre-release experience. Lorwyn Eclipsed is a much beleaguered return to the plane of Lorwyn, which is also Shadowmoor. And Mark Rosewater over at Wizards once stated that it's one of the least likely places to return because it was never really that popular as a plane, but it was really popular with the main player base, and so it's kind of fun to come back to this rather storied plane amongst Magic players. I've seen some of the cards from the set, and it is very interesting. Like lore-wise, it's very, very rich and interesting, and so I like that a lot about it. And we went back to Kamigawa, which we didn't think we'd go back to, so it's kind of fun to come back to Lorwyn Eclipsed. Unlike Kamigawa, this set has thematically not changed drastically from the first one, and so that is one thing that is really different. It's kind of like going back to Lorwyn in many ways, so that's kind of fun about it and also interesting, and maybe doesn't feel quite as powerful as a result of it, but that is Lorwyn Eclipsed as a set. The pre-release itself is pretty much the same as most Wizards pre-releases. You get a pre-release kit and a tournament, and that's it. Nothing else, nothing to really bring you into the flavor of the set, and so that it continues to be something that I hope that Wizards can learn to do, is to bring us into the flavor of the set, to make their worlds more interesting, because as it is, you know, just seeing the cards, if you don't do the reading of the stories, and the stories are backed for this one, so I'm glad about that, but if you don't do the readings of the stories, the flavor of this particular plane is going to be a little lost, especially on players that are brought in by the Universes Beyond sets. But you get this pre-release kit, and when you pull off the side, you get every light, cast, shadow here. You have some nice Lorwyn art on the inside, the usual counters and generic tokens, and then the cool set symbol here. And you know, if you look inside, there's even art on the back here, although this is probably the least impactful sky art that you can have. Inside you get your deck box, which is of rather cheap paper cardstock, but it's fine. You open it up, you get a spin down counter, which is using the current black with colored ink numbers motif that they've been doing with the set symbol here. You get one promo card, and this is one point of disappointment for this particular set, in that the promo cards no longer have any marker to distinguish that they are special for a pre-release. It's just a foil rare or mythic from the set at random. So that's a bit disappointing, because you kind of wish that you would get something a little special for the attending of a pre-release, and now it's not even special, it's just another rare, which, you know, doesn't feel that amazing. You have one little piece of artwork and then a little bit of information about the draft archetypes. Now, you're not drafting obviously, but it's still important in sealed to know what you're getting, and so the 5 main tribes that matter to this particular set are here. Now, there are all 5 of the actual tribes are represented in the set to some degree, but these are the 5 that are being focused on, and so it's important to know this when you're going into your sealed, to look for the synergies, and it'll speed up the process of understanding what the different card color combinations are trying to do. In the back you have your standard building pre-release deck guide. This, I think, will be fine for this particular set. I don't think that it's that different when it comes to sealed, so this is okay. I mean, you always wish that you had more, and Wizards is always trying to find ways to give you less for more money, right? So there's that. You get one card divider, and it's just some really generic art. I mean, it's cool, like I like the colors and everything, but you know, that's not really exciting. And you get 6 packs of Magic, and you open them and you build the best deck that you can. So I'll lay out the cards next. So, including my Scuzzback Scrounger promo card, here is everything that I opened. As you can see, I have a lot of blue and black cards, and so those were the first cards that I looked at to build the deck from. Now, blue and black isn't a supported color pair, and I looked at the combination of the two, and I just didn't have enough good fairy stuff to make that work. In fact, one of the problems with blue overall turned out to be that the rares and the overall power level of my blue cards was actually pretty low. The Glandulander's Answer and the Harmonized Crescendo are both kind of constructed cards, and so is Rhymefire Torque. And so I wasn't really impressed with what was left out of blue. Black, on the hand, had some pretty good removal and a nice stack of goblins, and so I was drawn to black. I also looked at green and white, because there were some decent amount of Kithkin cards, but when I put them together, I just didn't have enough cards in color to justify playing green and white, even when you throw in the changelings that I have in the colors over in the hybrid mana group. And so in the end, I took a look at everything, and even though red was the most lacking color, I actually found that I had enough goblins between black and red, and if you throw in some of the changelings, that it might actually make a pretty good deck. And it was especially compelling because I had Grub's Command and Grub, as well as the Champion of the Weird, all of which are strong goblin cards, and I had more goblins together than any of the other tribes. And there were some other non-goblin cards in the colors that I thought were reasonable picks, and so that is the way that I went. Alright everybody, so this is the final deck I built. The important thing with this deck is that I had to shove in as many goblins as I could. I had a decent amount to start with, and then I had to put in every changeling that I could because of two main cards, that being Grub, the Storied Matriarch, and Champion of the Weird. I can't even cast Champion of the Weird without having another goblin in my hand, so it's either the goblin or one of the changelings that have to be exiled alongside the Champion of the Weird in order for me to be able to play that. And then we also have the goblin Grub, and Grub wants there to be a 2 or 1 mana goblin to bring back from the graveyard. And so I had the Bile Boggart, the Boggart Prankster, the Feisty Spikeling, and the Scuzzback Scrounger are the 4 that I can get. And I think with 4, it's worth it. So I put all of those in the deck so that she can get it back from the graveyard. And then there's multiple synergies in this deck that actually can be quite powerful if they can work together. And so one of the synergies is that both Grub and the Champion of the Weird have you blight yourself. And so the creatures that I want to be blighting are the Hovel Hurler at 5 and the Gnarlbark Elm at 3, because those creatures actually can pull the counters off of themselves and then give you a benefit. So Gnarlbark does -2/-2 to another creature, so it's a way to actually get removal. If you team that up with Champion of the Weird, as long as you have mana to spend, you can -4/-4 once a turn, like if you have 3 mana, because you pull the counters off the Gnarlbark to -2/-2 and then put the 2 counters on with the Blight ability. Unfortunately, you can't choose what it goes on, and so sometimes you just end up shrinking your opponent's team and then -2/-2ing something to finish it off. But it's really a really powerful combination there. And same with the Hovel Hurler. Like, you put the counters on the Hovel Hurler and then you can take them off to give a creature +1/+1 flying. Now, this all requires mana, so it's not like an infinite combo of any sort, but it's combo strong enough that it makes it tough for your opponent. And then there's the Grub, which gets you back one of your 2 or 1 drops. As for the non-creature spells, it's mostly removal, as you can see, all the way from Requiting Hex up to Grub's Command being a very powerful removal spell. And it's one of the reasons why I put the Goliath Daydreamer in there, because it can let me recast these removal spells. And in addition to removal, I also put Burning Curiosity as my 1 card draw effect, and then the Stalactite Dagger as just another goblin, which can gain the benefit of the Boggart Prankster or the Champion of the Weird. Either way, I can take that out and then use the thing to give things +1/+1, and then that is enough, I think, for me to get enough benefit off of that. And so that is the basics of this deck. I sleeved it up. I put in 9 swamps and 8 mountains because I'm a little bit more on the black mana symbols here. And I took it to my matches. Alright, so let's talk about the games that I played. In my first match, I was up against a black-green deck. And my opponent in the first game got out to a reasonable start alongside me. But in the end, I managed to get Grub out with goblins that she can return from the graveyard. And that pretty much meant that my opponent, unable to find creatures to go over the top of my little ones, just ended up being dragged out. And that was a really long game, and my opponent ended up conceding because they didn't see any way of overcoming my ability to constantly bring back little creatures that would eventually eat and shrink their creatures into nothing. And then in the second game, my opponent was on the play, and things started out okay for both of us, but eventually I got the Grub's Command and the Goliath Daydreamer together and just started blowing up everything, getting value off of double casting my removal spells with the Goliath Daydreamer. And then they basically ran out of board and I just smashed through them for the win, taking me to 1-0 in the first match. In the second match, I was up against a white-blue deck against a very young player. Unfortunately for me, I had to mulligan and I ended up keeping a hand with no red cards, and I just got color screwed. And so I just couldn't play most of the cards in my hand, and my opponent put an enchantment on my Gut Splitter Goblin, which caused it to deal 3 damage to me every single turn, or I had to kill my own creatures with its Blight ability. And so I got wrecked by the combination of being color screwed and also my opponent hosing one of my cards really bad. And then in the second match, we started off relatively even, and my opponent was playing probably a little too conservatively because they probably had the win a lot earlier than they realized. But I also drew 14 lands in a row, and when you draw that many lands, you're going to lose this, no matter how poorly your opponent is playing. And so I lost that one, with them going up to 66 life, and I managed to survive for a long time by just blocking with my Iron Shield Elf and throwing away a land against their enormous, powered up multicolored creature. It wasn't enough in the end, and I kept hoping that I would be able to draw Grub's command to blow up their various creatures, but just couldn't do it, and so I lost that one in pretty strict order. And so I went 0-2 on that match, taking me to a 1-1. In my third match, I was up against a blue-black deck with probably the coolest matching themes and dice and card sleeves and playmats, as well as the color of their deck. I took a mulligan in the first game on the play, and I managed to assemble the combo of the Champion of the Weird plus the Gnarl Bark Treefolk creature, and I was blowing things up for a while, but then eventually they managed to exile my Champion of the Weird, and so I lost my combo, and from there they took the game over by drawing better cards than me. Even though, our life totals were relatively similar, I just couldn't overcome the removal and evasion that they had, and I lost that one. In the second game, I was on the play. I again had the mulligan due to the mismatching of colors and lands in my hand, and starting at 6. And this one was pretty rough because my opponent got a lot of value out of their graveyard and then duplicating cards off their Twilight Diviner, and ultimately they had just too much evasion for me to do anything about, and I just could not mount an effective hand of creatures and spells, nor could I find a combo or removal to deal with their threats, especially with the amount of recursion that they were getting from the graveyard. So I lost that one as well, taking me 0-2 in the last match and taking me to 1-2 for the overall tournament. How did I feel about the set? I think that it plays pretty fun in sealed. Like, even though I lost most of my games, I felt like the synergies between the creatures within the set, as long as you have a decent sealed pool, obviously it'll feel better in draft, were pretty fun. And I do have some concerns that this might end up being a little too tribal, like Ixalan, where you're kind of on rails in draft. But I also think that some of the potential options, like including the off-color combination tribes and perhaps even 5-color decks, make for some kind of interesting plays. And so I am looking forward to trying this out in draft. And I had decent fun with the set. I do wish that the pre-releases were special. They're not. They're becoming less special with every single set. At Emerald Knights, if you play all the way to the end of the 3 matches, you get 2 packs of Lorwyn Eclipsed, and I was glad to take those. And then that is it. And so let me know what your experiences with your pre-release were in the comments below. If you found this video enjoyable, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.